Hi, my name's Brad Young, and welcome to the Peak Performance Podcast. Today we're doing episode 25, Harnessing Adaptability for Peak Performance. In the podcast description, there's a link to the site that I create for every episode that has the information from the podcast, but also has practical application to where you go in and apply the theory because, at the Peak Performance Podcast, we're about practical application. Theory is nothing without practical application. Theory is just theory, but when we can practically apply it and use it, then it means something. It adds value. And so today we're looking at adaptability. And so the advantage of adaptability is that adaptability isn't just a nice skill to have, it's an absolute essential for peak performance. When we look at top performers across different fields, elite military units, championship athletes, successful entrepreneurs, the one trait that consistently emerges is the ability to adapt and thrive amid uncertainty. Adaptability allows us to navigate unexpected challenges, pivot when necessary, and maintain effectiveness even as conditions change around us. When we define adaptability, it's simply the capacity to adjust effectively to changing circumstances. Just your ability to change, your ability to adapt. It's the capacity to adjust effectively to changing circumstances. Too many people can't do it, though. They can't do it. They cannot adapt and adjust. When things change, they don't want to. They get left behind. They become dinosaurs, etc. But it's about maintaining performance even as the environment, the rules, or the conditions shift around you. But true adaptability goes beyond simple reaction. It's about anticipation, quick decision making, and the ability to thrive amid uncertainty. Think about elite athletes. They anticipate well. They make quick decisions, and they have the ability to thrive amid uncertainty and challenges. Adaptable individuals don't just survive challenges, they use them as opportunities to innovate and improve. They understand that change is inevitable, and rather than resisting it, they harness it to reach new levels of peak performance. Why adaptability matters so much more now than ever. Accelerating rate of change. Technology changes overnight. You have to be able to continually adapt and understand the market. You got to, it means everything to adapt because the cycles are faster than ever. The complexity of the challenges. Today's problems don't have simple, straightforward solutions most of the time. They demand being more flexible. You have to have multifaceted approaches, which just means thinking outside the box, trying different approaches and moving forward. They're more complex. So we have to, move faster, and we got to understand they're more complex. So we got to think differently about them. When you think about adaptability, you can think about the Navy SEALs. They operate in the most unpredictable and high stakes environments imaginable. They must consistently adjust their plans and tactics while maintaining peak performance. They have a motto: the only easy day was yesterday. And so that says everything you need to know about adaptability. They're embracing difficulty, they're preparing for the unexpected, and continually pushing beyond their comfort zones. If you think about that every day, if you get up every day and say, the only easy day was yesterday, you will continue to thrive and improve. This will help you get towards your peak performance, whether, it's in athletics, personal life, business, whatever it may be. The only easy day was yesterday. Elite athletes, they're the masters of adaptation. And it's true. When you think about, elite athletes, I always like to think about football because I'm a huge football fan. But when you look at it, they discover their opponent's weaknesses. They do film study and they adapt. When you think about a quarterback, he's reading the defense. And he changes the play at the line of scrimmage because he's reading the defense and he's strategically changing the play because he sees a weakness. And when you see that, then the defense reacts. The middle linebacker may go back and they may change the play. They may actually, they may actually back out of what they were in already. The defense may back out because it may have been a bluff anyway. And so it's a chess game. And so, but it's what makes these athletes exceptional because it's not just about your physicality, it's your ability to adapt the game plan in real time. You got, when the conditions change and the opponent changes their strategy, you got to be able to adapt. It's called situational awareness. You have a highlighted perception of the environment that allows you to anticipate and adjust before others even recognize the need for change. And that's what happens. That's what the greats. And that same thing goes for business, military units, personal life. And so when you start thinking about adaptability, entrepreneurs, this is something I've dealt with for years and years. And the businesses, they have to identify the opportunity. And it don't happen every time. That's why so many businesses fail in the first year. That's why they fail in the first 5 years. If they make it 10 years, it's going to be a miracle because they're not identifying the right opportunities. They're not looking at market shifts and understand their customer needs before the competitors do. The ones that do that, like the Netflix, the Amazon, the Apples of the world, they look at these opportunities as ways to grow. They test solutions, they work through prototypes. These businesses need to do that. You got to work through prototypes and get feedback. You got to understand before you jump into something, you have to test and understand it. Another adaptability trait is being able to pivot when necessary, willingness to change direction when evidence changes. You got to be able to do that in life. If what you're doing is not working, pivot. You got to pivot. There's nothing wrong in going to plan B or C or D or continuing to change, because if you pivot when necessary, you'll keep getting better. Then you got to scale what works. Double down on your successful adaptations. When you're looking at business strategy, you got to think about it. Identify the opportunity, test the solution, pivot when necessary, and scale what works. Because these companies that I talked about, the Netflix, Amazon, and Apple, they have completely reinvented themselves multiple times through strategic adaptation. And so you got to think about it. Netflix, man, they were mail in DVDs. You went to a little Netflix and you rented the movie there, and now look at what they do. Amazon, look at the changes in Amazon. They started off in a complete different market and continue to reinvent themselves and move. Apple's the same thing. Who would have thought back in the 80s that Apple was going to be the powerhouse it is today? And even the 90s. You got to think. Apple got strongest, when we got in the 2000s, with the iPhones and the MacBooks. And now, Apple's everywhere. I've got Apple everything around me right now, just about, because they've adapted. They keep things simple. They've seen opportunities like simplicity to be able to help them evolve and improve versus the competition. Because, you look at their competition, it's always more complex. Good example is I had somebody that got upset about their flip phone not working. And so they had to buy something. And so instead of going to the Apple, they went with one of the competitors. It was much harder to navigate. There was so much more complexity. Nothing was like it should be. Then they finally went to the Apple. And I'm not just making an endorsement for Apple. What I'm saying is Apple was simple. Everything is simple. You figure it out easy, utilize it easy, user friendly. Made it easy. Then they were able to use that. Now they can't keep their face out of their phone. But that's what it is. These companies have all adapted, from a DVD rental place to a powerhouse. Amazon, was selling music and things like that. They were, look at the the changes there, and look at Apple. Look at how they've continually to reinvent themselves and got better over time. And so we got to look at the adaptability mindset. And here's two different scenarios here. Here's the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. And this is how somebody will react. So if they got a fixed mindset, they avoid challenges that might expose their weaknesses. I see people do that all the time. They won't do things because they don't have confidence in themselves. They avoid it because they think it's going to expose a weakness, but it's actually just going to embrace them for growth. When you look at the opposite, you look at the growth mindset, They embrace challenges as opportunities. And so every challenge is an opportunity. And so these two are, are opposites. Fixed mindset gives up easily when things get tough. Obstacles get in the way, they quit. The growth mindset, they persist in the face of setbacks. Fixed mindset, they see their efforts as fruitless. The growth mindset person sees efforts as the path to mastery. And so it's not fruitless. They just see the opportunity to get better. And that's what makes people great. Fixed mindset, they ignore useful negative feedback. And so when you look at a growth mindset, they learn from criticism. But you've got to make sure you're getting criticism from the right people. One thing to make sure they can pass a test on what they're talking about, because too many people have opinions and criticism when they don't know anything about something. So make sure, you're getting it from the right place. And so that fixed mindset, they, when it's useful negative feedback, they ignore it. The growth mindset, they learn from that criticism from the right people, and they get better. Fixed mindset, they feel threatened by other success. I know a lot of people like that. The growth mindset, they find lessons and inspiration in other success. I've never known a great person that didn't make you feel great about yourself. They don't try to build people up. Never known anybody that you would consider successful or great that didn't try to help and build people up, because that's what great people do. They find lessons and inspiration in other success. They want to see people succeed. Fixed mindset people don't want to do that. So critical thinking and quick pivots. And so we think about adaptability, situational awareness. That's quickly gathering relevant information, identifying what's changed. You can think about this from a personal standpoint. Situationally, when you walk in somewhere, you've got to quickly gather relevant information, identify if anything's changed. You got to be, aware of your situation, because that could help you from danger. It could help you in many ways, as well as identifying what's happening, understanding where you're at in the situation. If you walk around staring into your phone to where you almost walk into poles and things like that, you're not situationally aware. That's a problem with technology at times, because people are not situationally aware, and it makes them very awkward when they actually have to understand, whether they need to fight or flight. Make them situationally aware for a business, make you situationally aware in sports. The NCAA basketball tournament's going on right now. They have to be able to make a situational assessment of what's happening. You've got less than 10 seconds to go. You've got the ball. You're down by 2 points. Are you going to take the 2-point shot? Or are you going to shoot for the 3 and the win? You're more likely to hit the 2-pointer, but you may have somebody that can hit the 3. And so what are you going to do? You've got to look at the option generation. And so when you start generating options, you got to rapidly develop multiple potential responses to that new situation. So what happens if this happens? What happens if this happens? You got to look at your options. So you assess, your team's hot right now. You made a big comeback. You're down by 2. Are you going to shoot the 3 for the win? So you have to rapidly develop multiple potential responses, because you can go inside and tie the game and go to overtime. You can get the foul. You can go in and try to get fouled, and you get 2 shots. You got to figure out what you're going to do. The 3-pointer is going to maybe your least likely chance. It's statistically going to be the hardest thing to do, but you may have somebody that can shoot it. So you got to make a decision then. It's a decision point. You got to choose the most promising approach given with with the information around you. All right. So you've got somebody that scored 20 points in the second half. They've been hot. They're 3 for 3 shooting threes. What are you going to do? You want to get the ball to them, but guess what's going to happen? They're going to be double teamed. And so then you got to go back and look at your option, your option generation. All right. They're going to be double teamed. They're hot. The other team knows that. They're going to double team that person. So that means somebody else is going to be open. So that goes back to situational assessment. You got to reassess it right there. Then you got to execute with feedback. You got to implement the chosen approach while remaining alert to results. And so, you can use that critical thinking for anything, but but you got to assess the situation. You got to generate options. You got to come to a decision point, and you got to execute. And that feedback, is going to be whether you hit or miss the shot. I mean, your business succeeds or fails. That's the feedback, and you just have to learn from it. And so now we're going to go look at emotional intelligence. And that's the catalyst of adaptability. Emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize and manage your own emotions while skillfully navigating others' feelings. It acts as a powerful catalyst for adaptability. So when you face a challenge, your emotional response can either enhance or hinder your capacity to adapt effectively. And so, I always like to say, you got to keep your emotions out of things. You make a decision, you need to make it based on logic. If you get your feelings too caught up in things, you're going to make an emotional decision, and that's going to be wrong in many cases. But people with high emotional intelligence recognize when emotions are clouding their judgment. And see, you've got to realize it. You got to say, okay, I'm angry right now. So am I going to let this cloud my judgment, or am I going to step back? Just like me. I mean, when my emotions get to where they cloud my judgment, I do a bunch of push-ups or pull-ups, or I'll go run, or I'll do something, because I got to think about things. I got to recognize, okay, I recognize my emotions are clouded, so I've got to take my emotions out of it and make a more clear decision. You have to manage your anxiety that naturally arises when uncertain things happen. So emotional intelligence is about managing that anxiety, because when things are uncertain and you're uncomfortable, you've got to manage that anxiety to make that decision. You got to remain open to feedback that may require an adjustment to something. That's the thing about it, is there's too many people that aren't open to feedback. Again, feedback has to be from somebody that's knowledgeable, that has a valuable opinion. You can't take feedback from people that don't deserve to give you feedback. You got to look at that from from different perspectives, because, everybody in the world's got an opinion, but only a few have valuable opinions that are actually going to help. And so you got to be able to decipher that. That's part of emotional intelligence. And you got to be able to connect with and influence others during transitions. And that's one of the hardest things to do, because emotional intelligence is twice as important as IQ and twice as important as technical skills combined for exceptional performance, particularly in leadership roles, because they require constant adaptation to people and circumstances. So having extremely high IQ is helpful. That means you can learn at an accelerated rate. But if you can't adapt quickly and understand it, it's not going to be successful at that position. If you have high technical skills, they're great to have. And I've known people with exceptional skills, but they have low levels of emotional intelligence. But yet they want to be a leader, but they don't have the ability, and they won't go and work on their emotional intelligence. People with high IQ most of the time they overthink things, because when you have a higher IQ, you overthink, and you know what you don't know. You understand what you don't know. It makes you less confident than someone with a lower IQ. The most confident person in the world is the average to below average person that they don't know what they don't know. They think they know everything, but they know so little, but they don't understand it. They don't have the capacity. And so that's where emotional intelligence comes in, and you have to recognize those emotions, manage your anxiety with uncertainty, remain open to feedback, because being able to take feedback in uncertain times is key to adaptability. And you got to be able to connect and influence others during this. You got to make them feel comfortable, know that you care, have an emotional intelligence with them, have emotional intelligence. You got to be able to adapt to them and their feelings and their emotional level, because you got to be able to work it and make it through. Because if you all just fight and yell at each other like they do on TV, you're not going to get anywhere, ever. Simulated simulation training for adaptability. Now, here's some good things that, a lot of military units do, but also, you can think of flights and things like that, pilots, different people. So scenario-based training, you create realistic but controlled situations that require adapting to changing conditions. When you think about that, I think about the Green Berets where they do the 2 weeks in North Carolina. They have to they have to go in. They've got to work with the local community. They have to train them in warfare. They have to work on almost no sleep, lack of calories, under high stress, to where they're physically drained. And so they've got to bring out the best in themselves in their worst scenario. And that's what that's about. That's a 2-week training. Gamification. So when you look at gamification, when you're gamifying something, like you think about this, is you're working on the mechanics to practice. So when you use gamification exercises, it's kind of like a pilot working on landing. You're getting your private pilot's license and you want to work on landing. You want to work on different things. And so you get in, you use the gamification exercises, and it gives you practice, and through visualization, you get better. When you apply it and then you have visualization, you get better, because every time you go out and you train, with that pilot, you can't land the plane. You can't fly every time. You're working and adapting the skills, but having gamification exercises can help this and help you practice and visualize it to where you're ready. Because, there's research done that shows that visualization can help you get significantly better at skills of just visualizing what you're doing. And so gamification helps that. Navigational challenges. These are tasks required to adjust to unexpected obstacles and changing parameters. Now, you talk about something for being adaptable. Navigational challenges are awesome. I mean, they are great. You think about the different groups that do these things. Your elite military units, and then you've got different type of groups that do these for like, when they go in the woods and they go through all these navigational challenges. They adjust and they have obstacles and everything's always changing. It's never just go run 50 miles this way. There's always going to be challenges. There's always going to be water in the way. There's always going to be something that's going to challenge. And you can do this, as a group to be able to learn how to adapt to obstacles and changing parameters, because, that's the way life is. That's the way business, that's the way everything is. Role-playing scenarios. These are you practicing communication and problem solving in unfamiliar context. And this could be a great one. When you're role-playing, I used to not take it seriously years ago because it seemed cheesy, but when you look at it from a adaptability perspective now, if you get into serious role playing and practice, you'll get better. People work as a team better if they'll role play. And then reflective practice, and that's learning from experience. After action reviews, after something happens, you debrief and you examine what happened, why it happened, and how to improve. It's all about adaptability right here. Reflective journaling. I do this all the time, and I'm going to do it here in just a few minutes. But I write down and reflect on challenges, adaptations, and lessons learned. I mean, this helps you identify your patterns and how to respond and change and reveal opportunities for improvement. When you journal, you see your own patterns, you understand yourself better. And then feedback loops, systematically gathering input from others about adaptability. External perspectives often spot our blind spots that we miss in our own assessment. And it's true. I mean, you miss your own blind spots every time. And so you have to understand what those blind spots are, and you have to get feedback from the right people to understand them. You journal and you reflect on what's happened. Then you look at and take after action reviews on what's happened. What happened this time? How am I going to do better? And then continual learning. I mean, the adaptability engine. Adaptability thrives on the foundation of broad knowledge and diverse skills. The more tools in your mental toolbox, the more options you have when facing new challenges. This makes continual learning a critical engine for adaptability. Highly adaptable individuals approach learning as a lifestyle rather than a occasional activity. They regularly explore fields outside their expertise. This is fun. I mean, this is a fun thing to do when you start exploring these fields and then you connect seemingly unrelated concepts together and then seek to understand their underlying principles rather than surface level facts. Because you seek to be adaptable. That's continual learning because you're exploring fields outside your expertise. You're trying to connect seemingly unrelated concepts and seek to understand underlying principles rather than just surface level. You're trying to find out the why. But this approach to learning is broad, curious, and continuous. It creates the raw material for adaptability. So when you're facing new challenges, these people draw connections to their diverse knowledge base. They find solutions that other people miss because they're breaking things down. And so we've got case studies in here. And so here's Netflix. This is what I was talking about earlier. We're going to do this, and this will be the last thing we're going to look at. But this is really interesting. So we look at adaptability. Netflix was founded in 1997 as a DVD mail-in rental service. I remember it. They were there to compete with Blockbuster. Blockbuster Video no longer exists. I think there's one store left. Netflix has repeatedly transformed itself through deliberate adaptation to changing technologies and consumer preferences. And so from 97 to 2006, they were a mail-in DVD service. They disrupted video rental with a subscription model. I mean, they made an impact early. And so then you go to 2007 to 2012. Their streaming pivot. They shifted to digital streaming before DVDs become obsolete. And so they were ahead of the game right there. They strategically shifted to streaming before DVDs become obsolete because DVDs pretty much obsolete at this point now in 2025. I mean, everything's digital. 2013 to present, content creation. They transformed from a content distributor to a major producer. They produce so many specials, movies, their own things. I mean, I have Netflix and I watch it fairly regularly. I mean, I don't watch that much TV, but I do have Netflix and there's things that I like to watch. And a lot of their stuff that they produce is very good. And then 2016 to present, their global expansion. They have adapted content and operations for international markets. Each pivot required extraordinary adaptability. I mean, sometimes making difficult decisions that involve huge risks. Huge risks that existed before those revenue streams. I mean, they had to risk existing money. You got to resist the revenue you got now to pivot, to start streaming, to produce content, etc. I mean, but they were willing to, cannibalize their own successful business models before they become obsolete. And it's something we all forget. We have to cannibalize our own business model before they become obsolete. I mean, that demonstrates the highest level of strategic adaptability. I don't think we'll find, a case study that would be stronger than this. I mean, they went from mail-in DVD to compete to, they're a global company. They're huge. Their stock's at a huge price at this point. But this is all strategic, but competitors like Blockbuster clung to their outdated models. Netflix adapted, and that's enabled them to grow from a small startup to a global entertainment powerhouse. And so we're going to look at practical steps to build your adaptability. And it's something that's going to be in your workbook. And this is what I've seen over the years that creates adaptability. You got to seek discomfort deliberately. Take on projects outside your expertise because it makes you uncomfortable. There's places and things that I'm a subject matter expert. I'm highly sought after in certain topics in certain fields. But I take on projects outside of my expertise, and that's how I've grown into technology. My goodness, it's amazing how far I got, going outside of my expertise and comfort zone and just learning. I mean, I had people to spell everything out for me. I continued to learn, and I've, in venture capital, I took on plenty of projects that were outside my expertise, but I learned quickly. Learn skills in unfamiliar domains. Exactly the same thing. You got to learn these skills to be adaptable. You got to practice making decisions with incomplete information. This is one of the hardest things because when you don't have enough information, some people will create paralysis by analysis. They'll paralyze themselves overanalyzing, but you got to be able to make a decision without all the information. In transportation, that's one thing that we had to do a lot. We didn't have all the information, but we had to make a decision, and if it was right, it was right. If it was wrong, we'd learn something. Build reflection habits. Schedule weekly reviews of your challenges. Document the adaptations and their outcomes. Identify patterns in your adaptive responses. I mean, these are strong things. Create simulated challenges. Practice skills under artificial constraints. Pretend like you're running a race. That's what I was doing a couple weeks ago. I was getting ready for a long event, and I was practicing like I was in the event. I was trying to pace everything right. I was, going through everything. I was pretending like I was doing it right then because I had to get ready. And so I practice under those artificial constraints, and it works. You got to be able to visualize and see what you're doing. You got to practice. And then you got to role play difficult conversations. It's hard to do. I mean, because there's a lot of conversations in life that are hard. I had one the other day. And I just smiled, I mean, they were so upset. I was like, I just smiled, it's okay. It was a difficult conversation for them. For me, it was not. But you got to practice that. I mean, you got to role play. If you're going to have a hard conversation with an employee, with another person, you got to role play and you got to think about it because there's a lot of real difficult situations out there, and you got to think about how you're going to do it because when you practice, you'll get it right. You can impose unexpected challenges during your routine tasks. That's a fun thing to do right there. Change it up, in the middle of your weightlifting, go run for 30 minutes, then get back to lifting. And that's going to challenge you even more because you're going to burn more energy. You're going to be, your glycogen levels are going to be a lot lower. You go back and train like that. Work out while you're on a fast. If you're doing intermittent fasting, work out during the fast. Go lift weights during the fast and see the difference. See how much weaker you feel. Same thing with working out early in the morning. Go in and work out at 4 a.m., 5 a.m. in the morning. See how you feel. You're going to be less strong. But that makes you have to work harder. You have to be adaptable. You got to understand how to work out at that time. And so the key takeaways, the adaptability advantage, mindset matters the most. When you cultivate a growth mindset and you've used challenges, opportunities, that's it. Your mindset's going to mean everything. You got to train through exposure. You got to build adaptability by deliberately practicing in the very challenging and unpredictable situations. Let's say you're going to run your first 5K. Well, you've got to practice in different situations because, you might go out and run too hot and you may exhaust yourself in this first 2 miles. But you got to be able to work through it. So you can go out by running at a harder pace and figuring out a way to get yourself back in it. Run harder, run yourself hot, run yourself till you're exhausted and then figure out a way to adapt and, challenge yourself because if you can run that same pace for the whole 5K, you're going to improve your time significantly versus what the pace you're running at. Reflect and learn. Transform your experiences into insights through structured reflection on your successes and your failures. When you succeed, you got to learn something. When you fail, you have to really learn something. We all have to do this to reach peak performance. You got to learn from your failures. When you fail, it's a learning opportunity. And then cultivate team adaptability. The best teams I've ever worked on or adaptable. You have people with different skill sets and you all work together. And so, as we close out on this podcast, adaptability is a skill. It's learned through experience. It's learned through practice. It's learned through a lot of different avenues. Because being adaptable, all right, it's, I guess if you think about it like this, when people grow up and you're small, and when you're little, when you're young, some kids grow at a faster rate. Their genetics, they're bigger, stronger than other people. All right. And so they have to be less adaptable. But as they get older and everybody catches up with them, if they don't learn adaptability during those early years, they may struggle with that. And it may lead into personal, business, athletic things. Some of the best athletes I ever saw that never made it is because they weren't adaptable. They couldn't adapt. When they weren't the best player on the field, they weren't the fastest person on the field, when they weren't the strongest person on the field, they crumbled because they'd never been challenged that way. And so we got to think about that. Being adaptable is being challenged. And so to reach peak performance, we got to challenge ourselves on a regular basis. And we got to learn to adapt. We got to go out and, just like I was talking about the 5K, go run hot the first 2 miles. And what I mean is just run harder than your pace, and then see what you can figure out. See what you understand about yourself, how you can improve that speed, how you can improve everything. But anyway, my name's Brad Young. This has been the Peak Performance Podcast. Thank you and have a great day.